Has the music changed in style from episode two? Is it still like what we've heard in episode one, or is it Genesis inspired, or has it been changed due to what the community due to community input?
So the music is something that actually I try to not. I mean, I have input on the music, guys, but I really like the stuff that Jun Sonoe has been doing. So he basically had a conversation with me at the start of the project, and we were talking about music. And one of the things he had mentioned is that he wanted to do music, for example, um, in the style of the Genesis. That because in the Genesis he only had 8 notes to work with, because that's all that the you could actually put in the game. So you had to make music using 8 different notes. And when we started thinking about Sonic 4 as a project, we definitely wanted to have that feel to it. So Sonic 4 Episode 2 will have the sort of more Genesis inspired themes, and that's definitely something that we wanted to keep. It was super important for us to have key elements in the Sonic 4 saga that felt very much a throwback to the Genesis. So music to me, obviously coming from Lucas, and THX and everything, music to me is half of what the experience is. So we definitely wanted to make sure that it felt very Genesis-y. Everything, even from the whole um, the even everything from the logo, the fact that we wanted to make sure that the logo had the halo and the wings, that you're all familiar with in the Genesis, that it had the old Sega and Sonic running past it, all those little elements that sometimes people take for granted. We actually made sure that each of those elements was in the game to give you that Genesis feel.
Many people in the Sega community want to know why Tails isn't playable outside of the co-op, as far as him being in single player.
Sure. So that's actually a very straightforward answer. The reason Tails isn't playable, it has a lot to do with level design. In order to, how's the best way to explain this? Sonic has certain abilities that when you play single player, gives you a certain way that you design the level around. Tails has completely different abilities as far as like what he does. So if we were to do Tails alone, we would basically have to recalibrate the levels to make it work within the confines of what Tails can and cannot accomplish. So that's basically what it comes down to. It comes down to which we can do. It's not that it's impossible. You can totally design levels around that, but it basically requires a much bigger development and a lot more time. So it's something that can be done on things like, when we were looking, say, 20 years ago, when we still had, the Genesis was still around, those products cost, if you take inflation into account and what it was, they had basically a box product budget. So you can do bigger level designs that take those elements into account. But when you have the confines of a budget and time wise for something that's a digital download game, there's just some things that you're going to have to sacrifice in order to bring the consumer the same value at a much, essentially at a fraction of the cost. So you're not paying $50 like you did back in the Genesis days for a box product. You're paying anywhere between $10 to $15 now. So unfortunately, that's just one of the things that we couldn't accomplish within the confines. We'll be bringing a ton of other stuff, guys, but the amount of resources it would have taken to tweak that level design would have just exceeded what we were capable of doing.
Can you go into the plot of the game?
I sure can.
Awesome.
Plot of the game is kind of goes back to the Genesis days. So when we were looking at how we were going to do Sonic 4 as a saga, like I always refer to it as the Sonic 4 saga, we were thinking, well, what are the things that we want to bring back? And ultimately, I think that when you look back, Sonic 2, Sonic 3, Sonic and Knuckles, they tell this very complete story of what was referred to as the Death Egg saga. And it had a very it had a very clear start and a very finite finish. And we didn't know it. We wanted to sort of like open the hood on that again and start messing with that because that story was so well done. But we knew we had a great game with Sonic CD, and that was a real fan favorite. And we felt there was more we could do with the story there than what had been done in the past. So we figured, well, here's what we'll do. Instead of going back and sort of opening up the hood on what the Death Egg saga was, why don't we come up with a new story but builds on the elements of Sonic CD? And one of the cool things about it is that Sonic CD never really had a place within the Genesis games. It could have taken place after Sonic 1. It could have been taken place even after Sonic and Knuckles. I mean, the reality is that particular game didn't really have a set place within the canon of when it took place. So one of the things we did with Sonic 4 was we said, you know what, we're going to make sure that we establish right now that all of these adventures take place prior to Sonic 4 Episode 1. And then what we'll do is we're going to sort of bring in the elements of the stories of Sonic CD into the numerical canon. So that's why we set Sonic CD up as a prequel. And then in Ep 2, you're going to actually see the reveal of why the levels of Ep 1 were so important, like why do we go to those zones specifically. And you're also going to see how Metal Sonic comes back to life after the events of Sonic CD, like how he comes back. And we're going to sort of unveil a much larger story building off the elements of Sonic CD.
Mm-hmm. Now, it seems that some of Sonic 4 Episode 1's more harsher critics seem to be happier with the direction the physics are going this time around. Even when I lurk in the SonicRetro forums, they seem quite a bit happier with that. Can you go into detail on what dynamics have changed in the physics from the first episode to this one?
Sure. So I think that right off the get-go, you're going to notice some differences. And I think the best way I say this is you'll notice 3 big changes right off the bat, within the first 10, 15 minutes of playing the game. One of it is we took fan feedback and made sure that we took out the uncurling when he rolls up a hill. So now Sonic will, when he rolls up those hills, he'll stay within that ball attack form. And the next thing is to start pushing the game towards having momentum style physics that are more similar to the Genesis. It's impossible for me to simply just swap out an engine and say like, hey, we're just gonna, put the retro engine within the Sonic 4 saga, because It doesn't work that way. If we actually put that engine in there, we would literally just break the game. The game would cease to function because the things that we need the game to do, the values that we need to have within the game, simply won't exist if we just plug in the engines, apples to apples. So what we did, though, is we got a little bit closer. So the next thing you'll notice is that Sylvania Zone is a great example. So Act 2 of Sylvania Castle, it starts off at the beginning of a big hill. So if you actually put Sonic towards the edge and you just sort of tuck and roll Sonic, like don't spin dash him, don't charge him up, just have him tuck and roll and go into the spin ball and let him roll down naturally, you can put your controller down actually, and he will not only keep rolling down that hill, but he'll actually pick up speed and then roll off a ramp, for example, and have it very similar in essence to the way we did on the Genesis.
That sounds
that
great.
Make lots of fans happy.
So that is things that we definitely were able to accomplish. The next thing that we did is, and this was a big complaint, was that when Sonic, for example, when he would jump, if you stop putting input into the analog stick, like right or left, depending on the direction you were going, he would get to the sort of the top of the arch of that jump and then just plummet like a rock. Because you had stopped putting input in the analog controller, so literally Sonic just stops. So what we did now is that as long as you have forward momentum going with you, if you jump with Sonic, you can let go of the analog stick and Sonic will complete the arch of the jump and he'll keep going forward. So again, these are all things that are more similar to the Genesis.